Far out in the uncharted backwaters of the unfashionable end of the western spiral arm of the galaxy lies a small, unregarded yellow sun. Orbiting this at a distance of roughly 92 million miles is an utterly insignificant little blue-green planet whose ape-descended lifeforms are so amazingly primitive that two of them still think doing a podcast called Digital Watches Are a Pretty Neat Idea is a pretty neat idea. These podcasters have, or rather had, a problem, which was this. Actually, this is the solution. Hey Brian, what's this?
Well, Jeff, this is the third issue of A Spoon Too Short, a Dirk Gently holistic detective agency story in comic book form. And as I said, we're on the third issue of this story.
Let's see how many different ways we can describe what it is.
Yep, you got it. As we see on this cover, looks like we're back in Blackwing. What do you think?
I believe you are correct. So in the previous issues, the first couple pages of the story flashed back to when he was a kid. Mm-hmm. Now he appears to be a teenager, mm-hmm. and he's getting the standard psychic test,
right,
where you have to decide if it's a square, a circle, a star, or a couple of wavy lines.
Or, in this case, a cat.
Exactly.
And in Dirk Gently fashion, he is giving the one-fingered salute.
Well, he might be giving a peace sign.
Oh, he could be. You
can't tell. The card is obscuring.
That's true. But I'm only inferring that based on the furrow in his brow.
Yes. As he is surrounded by large men in matching black suits wearing matching sunglasses. Mm-hmm. So we'll jump through the previously page really quickly. It's just reminding us that we had a family of tourists, the Kingdom Browns, that no longer have the ability to communicate. Mm-hmm. Dirk has a new assistant who was almost a client, and she is Tamara, and she says we have to go to Kenya. And in Kenya, Dirk gave a pen to an elephant, held up a pad of paper. The elephant scribbled something on it, and Dirk believes he has solved the mystery of why people can't communicate.
Yes, in Dirk fashion, he has made this pompous decision.
Yes. So we will move to the page with the cast of characters, and there's a few new ones. So if you want to read through who we're going to be reading about today.
Well, we see Dirk Gently, of course, mm-hmm. Sally Mills.
Yep.
The Kingdom Browns.
Correct.
Tamasha.
Yep.
Madluck.
Oh, yes, and he was the guy working in Kenya with the tribe with no words.
Right, and then here we're going to see Susan McDuff added to our list.
And she is listed as a cellist and harmonic.
Right. And then apparently the Chief Ja Tanga Bruce. I think that's Chief Ja Tanga Bruce.
Yep.
And he is listed as the leader of the Kawanza tribe.
Okay.
And then next we have Edward and Dradi. That's Jatanga's twin grandsons.
Right.
They are cute and also mute.
Correct. And this guy named his grandkids, or whoever the parents are, named the grandkids Edward, and Edward spelled backwards. So mm-hmm. If you've never heard of the name Drowdy before, that is why.
And of course, our recurring character, Bernice.
Yes.
Bernice is the cat.
Right. So just to be clear from what it seems, bringing in Susan and calling her a cellist and knowing that music was one of the keys, are they going to use a stringed instrument as the savior of the day in 2 comic books in a row?
Yes, they're going to go from a violin to a cello.
Yes. And in the 3rd book, it will be a bass.
Mm-hmm. Because Jeff, it's all about the bass.
It's, yeah. We do a little tune?
Oh, sure.
Please don't. And before he does, we will go to the first page of the story. So we flash back to a U.S. military research base 15 years ago, where Dirk appears to be shackled, spread eagle, facing down, not on the ceiling, but on the bottom of some sort of pillar. What would you call or describe that?
Yeah, that would definitely be a pillar. That's almost looks like a plunger or something, almost.
Right. Yes, like he's going to be smashed into the ground. And he's blindfolded, and they want him to describe what he sees, but he says the blindfold smells of foot.
Because it's a sock, of course.
Of course it is.
And he's hung suspended above what could be called a video drone. Hundreds of video screens displaying an individual image on each one.
Yes.
And an instructor or interrogator or such is down below saying that they're trying to discover what he can do with his powers.
Right. So we will go to page 2. Well, the best way to describe... Well, why don't you describe the page?
Sure. Well, this page seems to describe the condition that our friend Dirk is currently in. He's not only suspended above the ceiling on this plunger or pedestal, as you said, facing straight down. It apparently has begun to spin.
Yes.
And all of this is like, it looks as if it's water running down a drain. It spins all the way to the center of the image.
Right.
And they're interrogating him along the way.
Right. So you read this in a spiral.
Yep.
So basically they have told him that they are broadcasting images to him from around the world, and he needs to look for the connections.
Mm-hmm. And he says he can't concentrate. And what's odd here is he's screaming out to the general, "This is 911. And the general says, "No, there's no emergency here, lad. There's no safe words. It's not a game, so concentrate on what you see." And then he goes, 19119, 119, 119,
Yes.
11.
Right.
So, oddly enough, he's probably picking up something as we learn about his abilities, but they have no idea what it means, or neither does Dirk at this moment. He's just about to puke, I think.
Correct. And he's asking them if they think that he can see the TVs through a sock, which he obviously can't.
Mm-hmm.
So we will move on to page 3. Well, more green slime.
Yeah, that about wraps up this whole page.
Yes.
A whirling vortex of green slime is now falling down onto our favorite friend.
Being regurgitated out of Dirk.
The second full page bleed in a row.
Yes. For being an entire page of puke, it is beautifully drawn.
It is, oddly enough.
So on to page 4. After that ordeal, it seems some decorated officer is walking into Dirk's room, and he's apologizing and told him that the machine made him dizzy.
And Dirk is sitting in a completely empty room with some papers in front of him, and he's holding up a pencil.
Yes, and the decorated officer said that it is not his fault, and the science monkeys did not consider dizzy but wants to know if he saw anything.
And Dirk hands him the paper, and all we see is the paper in front of the officer's face. And he says, "Are you kidding me?"
So he saw something, and we will find out, hopefully, on page 5. But usually they're going to jump to Africa, and we'll have no idea
exactly
what it was.
Oh, and you are right.
Except we are looking at a drawing. We are looking at the drawing that was made by the elephant.
Mm-hmm. And our friend Madluck is remarking, "Are you kidding me?" looking at the squiggly lines on the paper.
Exactly like the officer.
Mm-hmm.
So Dirk responds to Madluck, basically saying that he doesn't believe that elephants are known for their sense of humor.
And Madluck continues, "It's squiggles made by an elephant. The only surprising thing is she didn't squish you."
Right. And then Tamasha wants to know if Dirk actually talked with the elephants, because she's heard from Susan that he had some strange abilities, and he just kind of laughs it off and says, "Don't be ridiculous. Elephants don't talk human."
Right. They speak in subsonic languages.
Yes. And Madluck confirmed that, saying that they communicate with low-level rumbles below the range of human hearing. And Tamara says, "Well, then, if you didn't talk with her..."
And then Dirk says, "Well, I may have thought with her."
Okay. So we'll find out what that means. So we'll move to page 6. This page is almost 3 identical panels of the 3 of them sitting in a car and Dirk explaining everything that he isn't. And the car is basically driving through the savannah, and the last panel they have actually made it to some sort of road. It's an unfinished road, but it's not surrounded by animals. And basically, as I mentioned, Dirk is just saying he's not psychic or psychosassic.
Madluck just says, "What nonsense is this?"
Yes. And then when Dirk mentioned he was psychosassic, which in the books he admits that it's a word he just created, Tamasha here says that's not even a real word. And he says, "My point exactly."
Tamasha says, "Dirk, help us out a little here. We want to understand."
Yes. So we will move on to page 7. So the conversation continues about the paper full of squiggles. And Dirk is trying to explain that elephants, they have large brains and big ears. They think very loudly and they listen very well. Let's just say those attributes inversely complement my own.
And Madluck replies, "Yes, you have a small brain and don't listen."
And then in very small type it says, "I'm not even going to rise to that. This doesn't count. It's in small font." And then he says, "Something unusual has been occurring, and the elephants, well, as you know, they have good memories. She drew me a drawing of what they saw, and I'll bet my holistic hat that it's a picture of the communication thieves."
And Madluck goes, "Once again, you have to be kidding me. These are still just squiggles."
And Dirk says, "Why do people assume that just because they can't recognize something, it doesn't exist?"
Then Tamasha chimes in and says, "So you do recognize what this is?"
Dirk says, "No, not yet." But now the problem is at least reduced to one of identification, no longer who did it, but just who is this? It's a much easier category of conundrum.
So this seems to be an obvious, I won't say ripoff, but an obvious clip from the original book in which Dirk scribbles on some papers, shows it to the secretary, and she says to him, "Well, what is this? Only a child could understand what this scribbling is." And he goes off and says, then that's what I must do. I must find myself a child to interpret what this says.
Right, right. We'll call it a plot device.
There you go. Never leave a joke unsaid, right?
Exactly. So page 8. So they've arrived at the village and slam on the brakes, and Madlock is saying enough, and he's done with wasting time with them. But Dirk is trying to convince him that their cases are connected.
And Madlock is convinced they're not, and he says they are not. Your case involves pachyderms playing with crayons. Mine involves the slaughter of innocents, extinction threat, and global criminal enterprise.
And I was waiting for Dirk to come up with some kind of quippy response, but they didn't do that, and they just go to Professor Travers and Madlock wanting to have a moment alone to say goodbye, and Dirk won't leave.
He seems to have gotten directly in between the two of them at an unfortunate moment.
Right.
Weren't there chickens on that page? There were, by the way.
I guess those are chickens.
Don't you get it?
I don't get it.
Cock-a-doodle-doo.
Oh, okay. That will not make it. That will not make the final cut.
I knew you'd cut out my best jokes.
Oh, if you say that, I'll put it in.
Nobody gets them anyway, so, it's just that much more fun. Oh, my gosh.
So we'll move to page 9. Evidently, Tamasha has kicked Dirk out of the car bodily, and he did quite the somersault coming up running. And he is very disappointed in his assistant and thinks he must dock her pay, and he's also appalled by the behavior of his client, so he must charge her more. So it's kind of a win-win.
Yeah, there you go. And then suddenly he is frightened by the existence of the twins.
Yes.
Who have now popped into the scene.
And said nothing.
And said nothing.
And Dirk tells Tamasha that he thinks he has found the tribe. Page 10. In a little narration box, it says, "Meantime, my friends back in London had decided to do some investigating of their own. Sally had enlisted Susan McDuff and her instrument."
Here she be. And Susan has arrived at the clinic with her cello.
Yes.
And she's a little credulous, asking Sally, is this really going to help? And Sally insists, well, I'm not sure, but the music seems to be different somehow for them. And she begins to play.
And she's just going to improvise, and Sally just wants her to follow their lead.
Mm-hmm.
And then pretty soon it looks like the youngest girl actually makes a sound, and from the way it's drawn, starts to sing.
Mm-hmm.
And they're excited, and Sally wants Susan to keep playing. So we'll move to page 11. Wow, the whole family is singing and dancing and overjoyed, and Susan says it's working, and Sally wants to call Dirk. But what are they singing, Brian?
Well, in typical fashion here, they're singing a little ditty.
Yep.
From Twelfth Night by Shakespeare.
Okay. We didn't have to look that up. We could just we just
didn't
knew
have to
it.
look that up. We knew that. I know my 16th century music like no other person on the planet.
Right.
It's called Google.
Right.
Oh my goodness. And why this family of four would be singing a 16th century song.
About the wind and the rain.
That may be part of it, but it it's weird. I don't know too many kids that could recite a 16th century poem or song.
No. But just in case it does become relevant, the title of the song is When That I Was and a Little Tiny Boy, and then in parentheses, with Hey Ho, the Wind and the Rain. So that's what they're singing.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll move to page 12. So we jump back to Kenya, where Dirk and Tamasha are having less luck figuring anything out or getting help from the tribe that can't communicate.
Mm-hmm.
They're trying to get him to speak. They're asking him questions. They're showing him cards, asking them to pick the one that symbolizes how they feel. There's a big crowd of people and Dirk is on stage asking if anybody has information. One person raises their hand and tells them,
nothing.
There you go. And then, of course, Dirk's phone rings because Sally is calling.
And she tells Dirk that the Kingdom Browns are singing. They're singing about the rain every day. And, of course, Dirk's response is fascinating.
Yes. So, page 13. On this page, it is pretty much a full bleed, mostly on the left-hand side. And it's Madluck. And he is, like most people after they have met Dirk, stewing about him. And basically he's mumbling to himself about all of the animals that he can't protect and his futile efforts and how he's outgunned and outspent. And it's not just a question of resources, it's organization. And he operates at the wrong end of an economic gravity well. And the gradient tends the wrong way towards painful oblivion. The very biodiversity that made Africa the birthplace of life now makes us its slaughterhouse. He says, damn your eyes, puffy detective. This is not a mystery to be solved. It is a tragedy to be endured.
Right. And then the phone rings.
I wonder who that is.
I don't know. But I tell you, my favorite part of this page is, the man has what I could only be described as a 12-pack.
Yes, pretty much. This was the musculature drawing page of this volume.
Mm-hmm. He is quite ripped, isn't he?
He is. So we'll go on to page 14. So Madluck answers the phone, and we see Dirk saying, Hakuna Matata.
And with a stern face, Madluck says, are you mocking me?
And Dirk is like, no, listen. And then you see this page of Dirk playing the piano, and the entire tribe is standing around singing something, which we can only guess is Hakuna Matata. And he says, we have a clue.
So it was on purpose. Now we know, that the warthog looked like Pumbaa.
Yes. Yes.
It's Disney's fault.
Yes. Right. And Madluck doesn't look like he has bought into this yet.
Not quite.
So, page 15. So here we seem to be in, I guess, what I would describe as Madluck's office.
Mm-hmm. Appears so.
And Dirk is doing not a complete solved it, but how he likes to summarize his cases for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So he starts with a premise that everything is connected.
And Madluck is a little dubious. He says, not literally everything.
Everything. So here's what we know. 1, someone or something stole the capacity for communication from both the Kingdom Browns and the Nkawa.
And Tamasha replies, we don't actually know it was the same person, though I admit it seems unlikely there are 2 sets of unrelated communication poachers. Then Madluck says, lucky, I have an infinite set of unconnected poachers.
2, however and why ever they did that, they left their victims with the capacity for song. 3, our thieves look like this. And he holds up the paper full of the squiggles. 4, our thieves are most likely also connected with the brutal murder of your rhino, Sid.
And Madluck says, no.
No?
And he repeats himself, no.
Why not? Hopefully we find out on page 16. Oh, goodness. That's a force.
What did I miss?
What do you mean?
He killed Sid?
No.
She says, Tamasha says, you've been farming rhino. He says, not me, not just farming, harvesting.
So the government has issued hunting permits to tourists. So he caught the poachers, but not really caught the poachers because they're legally killing rhino.
Ah, thank you for making that clear.
Right? Doesn't that make sense?
It does.
But it was the most ridiculous way to have presented it. It's not a, let's breed a whole lot of rhinos in one space so we have enough to hunt. It's an endangered species that they're trying to protect. So
right.
Douglas, I think, would be rolling over in his grave at this page.
Okay, well, I think this is summary page.
On this page, Madluck explains that he has already caught the poachers, kind of. And he wants to compare it to the concept of farming salmon. And basically, the parallel is where to keep the salmon sustainable, they have large ponds of salmon and they can then harvest as much as they want because they keep farming them and the wild salmon are safe. Somehow it seems that the government of Kenya is issuing hunting permits to tourists, and the black rhinos, even though they are endangered, are able to be hunted. But I still don't know how that made them sustainable.
No, not at all.
So we're going to move to page 17. Oh, more puzzle pieces. Maybe this will explain it. Well, this kind of goes along with what Douglas was saying, though.
Well, not the shooting and killing of them, but certainly the exploiting of them.
Right.
Okay, so like in the last comic book, now we have the puzzle pieces all coming together. And I mean that literally, because that's what's on this page.
Right.
Hundreds of puzzle pieces all colliding together into the page. Describe Madluck's situation so that we too can understand the puzzle.
So Madluck is saying that the hunting of the black rhino in general is strictly prohibited. The trophy hunting of a small number of specific black rhino a year is strictly allowed for $20,000 a piece, or rather, I guess I should say, a head. And it's not there in Kenya, but in Namibia and South Africa. The authorities there sell a limited number of permits a year, and the proceeds go to support conservation. So it's the dark side of conservation, tourism. Typically, the buyers are rich. There's a limit of one per person, but if you're rich enough, sometimes you can get a second one for your wife.
Tamasha comments that romance isn't dead.
Yes, because there's nothing better to do as a couple than to go out and kill an endangered animal. So page 18. So Tamasha is asking Madluck that if it's not allowed in Kenya, then how was Sid poached? And he's explaining about fake permits that the poachers have gotten out there somehow, and then they bring these tourists, and once the tourist kills the animal, they take the horn, and they didn't have to pull the trigger. Discussions are on, they've got to stop them from doing it, and the education of people and tourist companies, but as long as there's a demand, new illegal schemes will emerge.
So as Madluck is describing the situation to Tamasha, Dirk is fascinated by his hand in which he has the permit, and it's all crumpled up.
Right.
And he seems to see something in the pattern. He whips out his drawing from the elephant. Oh, I thought I was going to get that through smoothly, but you had to start laughing.
No.
I'm going to start right there just because of that. So Dirk whips out his drawing from the elephant and starts wrinkling it up into his hands. And he turns to the two of them and says, I can catch them.
And Tamasha wants to know if it's the poachers he's going to catch.
And then Dirk bows his head and says, sadly, no, I have no idea how to help you, Madlock. Sounds like the most miserable, horrific, intractable situation, and that you're a hero for even trying.
And Madlock thanks him. So we'll move to page 19. Dirk very excitedly is explaining that he knows how to catch the communication thieves and makes a list of what he needs, which is basically an orchestra and mosquito spray.
Madlock is puzzled and asks Tamasha if she'd like a drink.
And she says, please.
And in the bottom panel we see
Dirk is looking at his hands at a folded up version of the elephant drawing, which is creating a rudimentary face. And he says, gotcha.
I wonder if it looks like an alien to you.
It does look like an alien. So, page 20. So, in the biggest non sequitur you could ever imagine, they jump back 15 years ago to the military base where Dirk is looking at a piece of paper that he drew that had 911, 911 written all over it like he was at the beginning of the book. He is looking at this page when?
Well, it happens to be the 12th of September, 2001.
So his 911, 911 was really 9/11, and he is wondering if it is his fault and if he could have stopped it.
Right. He says he didn't know what it meant. He just saw the numbers in the pattern.
Yes, and the officer is consoling him, and he said it was never his fault, that they should have listened to him better, and they will get to learn to use his gift better. And Dirk is thinking that back then he believed him because he was a child. And that is the end of this issue. So my question to you, Brian, is what do you think the reason is for dragging the 9/11 tragedy into this story about an African tribe and some tourists who lost their voice? What could possibly be connected?
I'm sure you're going to tell me, Jeff.
I don't. I'm thinking that it is just they're trying to portray Dirk, I guess, as having a horrific life as a
Childhood,
kid
yes.
in that
Yes.
thing. And what would be more horrific than to have had a vision of 9/11 and have been able to do nothing about it? But
Right. The only thing.
seriously.
Right. Is there any. Do we know the date of this publication?
Well, it's saying 15 years ago. So I believe it's a 2016 publication.
Okay. Yeah, it does seem odd. I really don't know, but all right. Yeah, I'm confused about that. Maybe they'll clear it up in the other one, but it just goes to show that Dirk's powers were not really perceptible.
Right.
Even when he was a kid.
Right. And I don't know if they can connect it to 9/11, but I really don't want them to.
No, that would not be right.
No.
And of course, we are told at the bottom of the page that the next time on Dirk Gently, we have Stakeout.
Yes. And that is what we will be talking about in our next episode.
So if that's what's next, Jeff.
I guess it's time to say that this is the end. Thank you for listening to this. A new episode is released on the first Thursday of every month. A special thank you goes out to Luke, Max, Greg, and Tim Lesnick for arranging and performing our opening theme. Visit our website at digitalwatchesareaprettynneatidea.buzzsprout.com. While there, you can find links to all of my Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy inspired t-shirt designs. You can contact us via email at digitalwatchespodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on YouTube and Facebook at Digital Watches Are a Pretty Neat Idea. You can message us on Twitter, or should I say X, at Watches Idea, and our Instagram is Watches Idea Podcast.
This has been a Foods for Thought production.